everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Black Liberation Tech podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Renee Jordan, and today we're going to do a Q&A, and it is going to touch on one of the previous Black Liberation Tech podcast episodes, which dealt with what do you have to let go of in order to move on up? And so I'm going to jump right on in. So this first question says, processing heavy feedback without losing your voice. Okay, so let's set it up a little bit. After passing your prospectus, you had to make significant adjustments based on your committee's notes, including directly changing the phrasing of your main research question. How can we process and implement heavy critical feedback from mentors or supervisors without feeling like our original ideas or voices are being erased? Okay, so the first thing to recognize, whether it is feedback from your dissertation committee or feedback from your supervisor, you have to recognize that this is a collaborative effort. And so while you'll say, well, I'm the one doing the work, I'm the one putting the project together, I'm the one that's going to do the interview questions, this, that, and the third, it is a collective process because your dissertation committee are the ones who are responsible for ensuring and providing feedback to help guide you along your process. And that feedback is not to stop you or to hinder you, but to help support you along your way. So the first thing to do is to rephrase it in your mind, saying these people are trying to help me get through. And as long as there's feedback to help me in that direction, then I need to take it under serious consideration. Now, with the phrasing of my research question, it was important that my research question didn't just make sense to me, it needed to make sense to the people who I would be asking to join my study. And in order to gauge whether or not what you're saying is coming across clearly to someone else, the committee is a good starting point. And so, because they are the experts in their field, because they have done research before, because they are outside of all of the information that you have inside of your head, they're able to take an outside perspective on the information that you are intending to communicate to others. And so the first step is to make sure that your research question, your prospectus, your proposal, what you're doing makes sense to your committee because they are going to guide you in a direction to help you along your way. So changing my phrasing from how to what are the perspectives of allowed my research question to come across clearer to my committee. And then it would come across clearer to those who I would invite to be a part of my project because I needed to share that question with them too. And so if it allowed my messaging to be more clear, then that is the most important part. And therefore, my voice wasn't being lost, but it was being clarified. And so it was important for me to take that into consideration. Now, some other heavy feedback that I had to take into consideration was that they told me to remove 30 pages. And I was able to resolve that, as I stated in the episode, by simply cutting the information out, pasting it into another document, and saying save for later. Just because you're not going to be able to push, let's say you have 10 ideas or 10 things that you want to make sure you cover in a project. Just because you need to eliminate, in this case, let's say 3 out of the 10, that doesn't mean that those are bad ideas. It's just okay to save them for later. Maybe it'll come up another time. A part of the feedback was that piece or section, that information that I was removing would be good for an autoethnography, but I'm not doing an autoethnography right now. Therefore, that needs to be removed because although the information might be helpful to me in terms of processing my journey and my progress in how I came about deciding on what to do for a project, that doesn't mean it has to be in the dissertation. It can be in an autoethnography. It can be a presentation on lessons learned to others. And in fact, a part of what I did as I progressed was that I would participate in the student association for my department. They had their own conference, they had their own summit, and I was able to share lessons learned there. And those lessons learned came in handy to those who were coming up on their prospectus, those who were coming up on their dissertation defenses, those who were thinking about what they wanted to do for their final project. And as a result, they were able to learn from me in order to help themselves along the way. And I showed them the visuals that I had to go along with those 30 pages, if you will, and how every time I went back and clarified and removed things from my prospectus, the actual image became clearer. Just like I gained clarity in the expression of my ideas in terms of writing, I gained clarity in the visual aids that I used to describe what I was doing. There was less congestion. It was more succinct. It was tighter. It was more presentable. It was easier to digest because it didn't have as much as I initially started off with. And so that was a plus. So understanding that your dissertation, even though you're the one sitting in the computer for hours on end, those committee members are there to support you. And in the selection of your committee members, hopefully you had the chance to get to know them so that you understand the best ways to get feedback from them, as well as know that they have your best interests at heart. And while it might be tough at the moment because you're saying 30 pages, do you know how long it took me to write 30 pages? It's okay. Create a file, save it for later, and do what they say. They're the experts. If it's a matter of rephrasing your question so that it comes across to someone else other than you in a way that is clearer than what it would have been, do that. Now, when it comes to being concerned about feeling like your original ideas or voices being erased, think about what is the most important part of your project. What is the most important part of your dissertation? Is that intact? And so, one of the most important things to me was that I was able to spread my net wide and ask those who self identified. I didn't label people. I asked them how they identified. I gave them space to do that. And then I also provided space for them to answer as if they were answering on the US Census. So they had space to self identify, and they also had space to select from common choices and also say, I prefer not to answer. And so it was important for me to cast my net when it came to those who identified as Latinas, Afro Latinas, and Black women, because I know that from my experience at an HBCU, from my experiences in other places, that Black people aren't a monolith. And so the same can be said about Afro Latinas and Latinas. And therefore, I wanted to respect the diversity that is amongst groups of people who have been lumped together. And I wanted to leave room for that. And so it was important for me to do that. So instead of just sticking with Black women, because if you say Black women, there are some Black women who identify as Afro Latinas. If you say Latinas, there are some Latinas who identify as Afro Latinas, and then there's those who identify as Latinas. And so I did not want to say Black women only. I didn't want to say Afro Latinas only. I didn't want to say Latinas only. I did not want to say a specific group in that sense. And I also left it open for those who did not identify with those groups to participate, and I would interview them anyway so that I could still get their perspective and include what they had to say as well. And so that was important to me. And that was something that I made sure that I held on to. So, with all that being said, thank you again for listening to another episode of the Black Liberation Tech podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Renee Jordan. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and share, rate, and review the podcast to help it become more discoverable. And until next time, take care. Bye bye.